Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for January 26th, 2023. Well, we've been hearing a lot recently with the Republicans taking the majority in the House of Representatives of the possibility of a new church commission being set up to investigate the systemic abuses from the intelligence community. And I think it's worth taking a look for a moment at what the original church commission found in its 1975-76 investigations, and then look at where they should be looking today. A true bipartisan approach to getting underneath the permanent bureaucracy, which is corrupting the judicial process in this country, as well as the political, strategic, and financial policies. So in 1975, there was a Senate Select Committee set up to look into the abuses committed by the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the IRS, and other institutions. And they looked into the operations that were run by these agencies that violated the constitutional rights of citizens, as well as violations of international law. Some of the systemic abuses they found were quite incredible. For example, Operation MK Ultra, which was using drugging and torturing of citizens in experimental methods of mind control. A second one, COINTELPRO, which was surveillance of civil rights organizations, anti-war groups, as well as groups such as the KKK that included what were called black bag jobs to both plant evidence as well as inciting unlawful behavior by people in those groups to allow for prosecution later. Something oddly named called Family Jewels, which was a CIA covert operation to assassinate foreign leaders and officials. Another one was Operation Mockingbird, which was propaganda operation to plant stories in mainstream media, using to basically cover up for what the CIA and FBI were doing. And another one, Operation Shamrock, which was the use of major telecom companies to get them to share information with the NSA to provide watch lists and carrying out spying on citizens. Now, do all of these sound familiar? The Church Commission found mounds of evidence to show corruption and illegal activity, and supposedly there were reforms to prevent this from continuing. But obviously, it didn't work. We see the same corruption, in fact, on a much larger scale today, in a much more dangerous way, both in terms of taking away the constitutional freedoms guaranteed to our citizens, but also putting us on a course toward bankruptcy and war. Now, congressional oversight, which is the idea behind this new church committee, must be really bipartisan, not an attempt to pay back what was done against Democrats or Republicans in the past, but to get underneath, to look at who's doing this and why. Now, some of the abuses that have to be investigated are obvious. The whole FBI, CIA, NSA role in Russiagate, which was a fraud that was perpetrated on behalf of the Clinton campaign, run initially through British networks, through U.S. intelligence agencies, to destroy the presidency of Donald Trump, in particular, his wish to have friendly relations with Russia and China. That was the target of Russiagate. Government role in censorship. We're now seeing this from the Twitter files, that government agencies were targeting different groups and individuals using Twitter. Assassination. The Trump administration and Pompeo in particular, the targeting of Soleimani, Iran's Revolutionary Guard leader, who was murdered. Soleimani was working to eliminate the terrorists of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In that sense, he was allied with American interests, but he was killed when he was fighting the terrorist agencies that had been spawned and armed and trained by the CIA. Go back further, Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Has there ever been a conviction of U.S. officials for their role in using that lie to carry out a war in Iraq? What about surveillance and torture that were carried out under the so-called war on terrorism? And this includes investigation of the Bush and Cheney operation, as well as the continuation of these policies under Obama. Now, the Democrats are complaining that this new committee that's being set up is a selective attack by Republicans on Democrats. And in some ways, it looks like that. That is not the right way to do it. What we really need to do is look at why there's bipartisan support to continue to cover up the illegal activities of these agencies. The bipartisan support for war, for example. Why is that still the case? So one of the things we can do is look at exactly what's behind this from a broader approach. And you can use the Russiagate case, but there's many more. As I mentioned, we could go back to the Iraq War and so on. The question that has to be asked is whose interests are being served by the activity of these permanent bureaucracies of the government, whether it's in the Justice Department, the State Department, the Treasury, the IRS. Whose interests are protected? What are the policies that are being protected? And the relationship, for example, between the British intelligence and the City of London with US intelligence, as was evident in Russiagate and is evident today in the push for a war against Russia. So these serious investigations must take up who is pushing for a war against Russia and why? Who is pushing for a war against China and why? Who is supporting the Great Reset, which doesn't benefit American people, but benefits the corporate conglomerates that sit above nations, that are committed to destruction of national sovereignty so they can run global empires? Now, if you really want to investigate this, the best place to start is the LaRouche case, because the Lyndon LaRouche case involved the greatest systemic abuse, as former Attorney General Ramsey Clark admitted, against an individual by U.S. government agencies. He was unjustly convicted and framed up, but this followed years of slander and lies, including coming from government officials such as Henry Kissinger, through the FBI, through the CIA, the National Security Agency, and others. One of the perpetrators of this, or one of the people involved in this persecution, was Robert Mueller, who later became famous for his role as FBI director and then the special counsel looking into Russiagate. Now, what was LaRouche's crime? He demanded an investigation into illegal operations that were defending corruption, the protection of drug traffickers and money laundering, financial schemes such as the derivative operations that blew out famously in 2007, 2008, and are blowing out again today. Regime change operations such as the wars against Iraq, against Libya, the 2014 coup in Ukraine. These are all highly relevant today, but they were identified by LaRouche as so-called deep state operations as they were going on in the beginning of this century, shaping the situation, the strategic danger that we're in today. The defense of a bankrupt system, that's what these were operations designed to do. We also need to declassify the documents related to the Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations, the Malcolm X assassination, the protection of the agencies that were involved in this, either carrying it out or covering it up, has given them free rein today to continue to carry out these operations. We also need to look into the whistleblowers who were calling attention to the surveillance state, people like Bill Binney, like Edward Snowden. So if you're going to have a church committee, it must not be partisan. It's got to look at the whole range of operations and the international connections. And these were importantly identified in the Schiller Institute conference on the assassinations of Kennedy and King. And I'll put a link to that conference at the bottom of the description page so you can see the extensive documentation that we've been pulling together, including operations in Italy, in Germany, in France, in Africa, carried out by these US agencies and their international counterparts, especially British. That's what has to be investigated. That's what's behind the attack on American sovereignty and behind the attack on the freedom of American citizens to speak and debate and fight over politics without having to submit to an oppressive narrative imposed from the top. So take a look at our event from 2 weeks ago. I forget the date, but it'll be linked below. Take a look at that and join us on February 4th, where we continue this mobilization to give people an opportunity to fight against the control of your future. And that future right now, with this decision made to provide tanks to Ukraine, we're headed toward what could be a nuclear war unless we grab control away from these nefarious networks that are controlling these agencies. Now, tomorrow's Friday. I'll be taking your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com.